All right, we're at week 4 now. The focus this week is upon survey design and cognitive interviews. Now, this topic that we're going to cover today is a huge area that you can get your PhD in, called psychometrics. We aren't going to obviously be able to get really deep into this area, but I do think it's worth talking a little bit about how to design good survey questions and to learn a little bit about cognitive interviewing, which is a really fun technique to be able to tell whether people are really understanding the questions that you've written. Being from Oklahoma, I often say things and think that I'm being really clear, but people don't understand what I'm saying. So this is something that's sensitive to me. I understand how communication, it's difficult sometimes to get your point across. So what we're going to do this week, you're going to think about, again, your project, and I'm guessing that there are different factors that you've got outlined in the diagram that are impacting health. Some of those factors, there are probably well-established measures. Let's just take, for example, stress. If you wanted to measure stress and how that might be influencing, let's just say it's asthma. There are a lot of different well-validated ways to measure stress. You could draw blood, you could draw serum, and look at some of the inflammatory cytokines. You could also give a self-report measure, and you could ask them about stressful life events. Have you had a car wreck last week, lost your job in the last month, things like that, events that are stressful. Or you could also ask stressful, what's it called, Cohen's measure. That's a general measure of stress. So if we think about stress in a general way, there are very validated measures for that. But let's just say that you were really interested in violence in the neighborhood, or maybe even noise in the neighborhood, not just the violence. But you wanted to understand stress related to the violence in the neighborhood. In that situation, you might decide that you want to come up with your own survey that is specifically measuring these different components of violence or noise, however you want to think about it, that's happening in the neighborhood. So what you're going to do is sit down, think about it, and write up your own questions. You've got to think about, is this going to be a close-ended question with a strongly agree, that kind of a response format? Or do you want it to be something where you're just having them mark off, this happened, this happened? Now that's just one example. But the point here is that what I want you to do is to focus upon a factor that is relevant to your project, that there's not a well-validated measure of, and you are going to come up with 5 to 10 questions that you write up, that you develop on your own. 5 to 10 of those. Now, I'm thinking that most of you probably, this is going to be a close-ended format. So close-ended is where you're asking a question and then you're doing the traditional Likert scale response. You will have to think about, do you want to have it be a 3 response, 4 response, 5 response? That's up to you. But a few of you may be doing qualitative research. I don't know for sure. And if you've got an idea that's qualitative in nature, then I actually want you to feel free to go ahead and write some semi-structured, sort of open-ended questions. That's completely fine. But in either case, what I also want you to do is to come up with some probing questions. And you'll learn more about probing questions from the readings this week. But basically what probing questions are questions that you will write. So you've already written up your 5 to 10 questions that are going to comprise that factor that you want to understand. But for each one of those 5 to 10 questions, you will write up an additional 1 or 2 questions with the intent of asking people those questions to see how did they understand the question that you wrote up. You might be getting dizzy because you're writing questions and then writing questions about questions, but this is it's very instructive, and I think the only way to really learn how to do it is to just get out there and try it. So if I write a question, one of the things, I'll pick a question from the CESD, which is a depression measure. We did some of these cognitive interviews with patients over at County, and one of the questions on this measure was something to the extent of, have you felt so down or blue in the past week that nobody could cheer you up? Well, what we did, one of the probing questions for this was, how did you understand what I was asking in this question? And patients were very confused. They said, well, when I feel down or blue, that's not depression. I feel that all the time. When I listen to blues music, I feel down and I feel blue. So they really weren't getting this question at all. They weren't getting that this was trying to understand using the word down and blue as if it was depressed. They were in a completely different ballpark in terms of understanding this. One of the questions on there simply asks, have you felt depressed? And so one of the probing questions I said is, in that sentence, when you read the word or heard the word depressed, how did you interpret that? What do you think that meant? And you should have seen the ranges of responses were from, I thought you asked if I was crazy, all the way to, oh, I just thought you wanted to know if I was feeling stressed. So you can imagine too, I'm a clinical psychologist. If somebody asks me if I'm depressed, I interpret that as a major depression, right? Your average normal person doesn't interpret depression to that extreme. So those are examples of how we can use words that we use every day, and without knowing it, people are really understanding what we're saying in very, very different ways. The purpose of the cognitive interview is to help elicit that information, to get that out, to try to figure out, is this word too abstract? Is this word not clear? Did I use a double negative? You can simply say, one probing question can simply be, you ask the person the question that you wrote and then say, what did you understand I was asking you? That's a perfectly fine probing question. But some of your questions may be written such that there's a certain piece, just a small phrase in there. You can also have a conversation with a person and say, this is what I'm trying to get at. Do you feel like I got at it? How could I phrase this better? So you'll be writing up 1, 2, maybe 3 cognitive interview probing questions for each one of those 5 to 10 questions, and those are going to be posted by Wednesday. Then what I'm going to do is give you some feedback. I would encourage each of you to get on there and actually read other people's questions and their probes as well. I think that'll be helpful. And then what I want you to do between Wednesday and Sunday is to actually find 5 people. I don't care who they are. It can be the bus driver, it can be family, it can be friends. But try to put some diversity there, either in age, in gender, in something diverse, so that you feel like you're getting people that perhaps might have different perspectives. Maybe somebody with a business background and somebody with a health background and somebody that's in social services or something like that. And you're going to then go through, ask them each of those questions, and after each of those questions, you're going to ask them those probing questions. So you are actually going to be doing cognitive interviewing on the questions that you have written out. Based upon the feedback that you get from the cognitive interview questions, you're going to make changes to your questions to make them more concise, to make them more clear. Now, you can also do the same thing, cognitive interviewing, on the response formats too. So let's see, you want to start out with 5. You'd ask the question and give them the response options. Then ask them, did they understand the question? And then you can do the same thing with the response items as well. You don't have to do that, but if you're trying to figure out, should this be 3 or should this be 5, ask the folks. A lot of times what happens is we'll put 7 levels of responses to our questions because, well, we're more likely to get statistical significance that way because we get the numbers spread out. However, in reality, if we were a strict psychometrician, we would do some item response theory, and what we'd figure out is that people weren't even using each of those responses, so that it's not really all that helpful and that we should really decrease it. So you're welcome to do that on your responses too. This is, again, if you feel confused by it, email me. I will also give you responses back Wednesday, so you'll have a little bit more to go on if you're having trouble, so perhaps I can help tweak some of those questions for you. But so you might want to check back to see if I've given you anything helpful. I'll get those things done by Thursday for you, Thursday evening for you, if not sooner. And that way you can integrate those before you go out to do your cognitive interviews. But this should be really fun. I hope that you'll appreciate how difficult it is actually to communicate. All right, see you next week.